The sun hovered low in the sky over Cedar Grove on that July afternoon in 1982, painting the apple orchard in soft gold. Long rows of trees stretched toward the horizon, their branches heavy with ripening fruit. Bees hummed among the blossoms, and a warm breeze carried the sweet scent of apples and fresh grass. In this quiet town, where everyone knew each other by name, the orchard was a favorite place for children to play. That day, 6 friends decided to meet beneath the largest tree, whose trunk was wide enough for 3 children to hug at once. There was Lucy Morgan, age 8, small and quick, with curly brown hair that bounced whenever she laughed. Next to her stood her older cousin, 12-year-old Jake, tall and serious, always watching out for his cousin and the others. Nearby was Rosa Santiago, age 10, whose dark eyes shone with curiosity and whose brave heart led the group into every little adventure. Alongside Rosa was her best friend, 9-year-old Carlos, quiet but clever, always noticing small things others missed. At the edge of the group stood twins Emma and Ethan Parker, both 11, inseparable and full of chatter. Finishing each other's sentences before the other could speak, they brought a toy wagon to cart apples and a picnic blanket to rest on. When they grew tired, a few pieces of chalk and a frisbee rounded out their gear. They promised their parents they would be back by 6 o'clock for dinner. In Cedar Grove, trust ran deep, and no one worried when children roamed the orchard, chasing sunlight through the leaves. As the children wandered between rows of trees, they started a game of hide-and-seek. Jake counted to 30 beside the old wooden fence, while the others scattered. Lucy darted behind a trunk. Rosa crouched beneath low branches. Carlos slipped into tall grass, and the twins tumbled together behind a hay bale. After a while, Jake shouted, "Ready or not, here I come," and dashed off, calling out their hiding spots as he discovered them. Laughter rippled across the orchard, carried by the breeze. When the game ended, they took turns rolling apples down gentle slopes, seeing whose apple would go farthest. Emma's apple outpaced Ethan's, and the twins teased each other good-naturedly. Rosa found a perfect red apple that rolled smoothly, and she offered it to Carlos, who grinned and took a bite. They all shared slices, sticky juice running down their chins. Under the shade of the great tree, they lay on the blanket and told stories about imaginary pirate ships and treasure hidden beneath the earth. Time slipped by like water. The sun climbed higher, then began its slow descent. The orchard took on a warm glow as the afternoon grew late. Some parents followed from a distance, working among the trees, pausing now and then to wave. Beyond the orchard, the town of Cedar Grove remained calm and friendly, unaware that this day would change everything. At 5 o'clock, Jake glanced at the sky and reminded his friends, "We need to head back soon." Lucy sat up, brushing grass from her dress. Emma and Ethan gathered up the blanket, folding it carefully. Carlos pointed to a distant ridge. "Let's take the shortcut beside the creek," he suggested. Rosa hesitated. "Are you sure?" she asked, remembering the creek's slippery banks. But Carlos, eager for one last thrill, promised to be careful. Jake shrugged and said, "All right, but we stick together." They trod through the tall grass, the wagon rattling behind them as they walked. The creek lay between 2 high banks, where water trickled over stones. The children paused to hop across, holding hands in pairs. Ethan slipped on a mossy rock, and Jake steadied him quickly. Laughing, they continued on the narrow path that wound between trees and brambles. Then, just beyond the creek, Lucy spotted something odd. A small, dark shape lay half-hidden under a bush. She called, "Look," and they all gathered around. It was an old red cap, torn at the brim. Carlos frowned. "That looks like one of the twins' caps," he said. But when Emma and Ethan checked their heads, they realized their caps were safe in the wagon. "Not ours," Emma said softly. Jake picked up the cap and dusted it off. "It might be from someone who walked here yesterday," he said. They decided to leave it and press on, joking that maybe a forest animal lost its hat, but an uneasy feeling settled among them. The trees seemed to grow taller, their branches twisting overhead. The breeze stilled. When the path curved back toward the orchard's open rows, Jake noticed the wagon was gone. "Where's our wagon?" he exclaimed. Hearts pounded as they scanned the ground. The wheels had left tracks, but they led back across the creek and vanished among the reeds. The children exchanged worried glances. Lucy's voice trembled. Maybe it rolled away. Carlos pointed to the spot near the creek. No, it can't be that far. And who moved it? Emma wrapped her arms around Ethan. Let's get it back. The group walked quickly toward the creek. When they reached the bank, the wagon lay. On its side, apples scattered around it. One wheel lay several feet away, half buried in mud. Jake knelt and examined the wheel. This isn't ours, he said, noticing the wheel's distinct metal spokes and faded paint. Rosa touched the spokes. Someone must have brought it here. The children felt goosebumps. The forest around them felt suddenly too quiet. They hurried back toward the orchard's entrance, voices hushed. Lucy led the way, tears welling. In her eyes, I want to go home, she whispered. Jake scooped her up. We're almost there, he said, but his voice shook. When they reached the area where the great tree stood, they saw a group of grown-ups gathered in a circle. Faces glowed with flashlight beams, shouting names and calling the sheriff. Mrs. Morgan lunged toward Jake, wrapping her arms around both. Cousins Lucy, where have you been? She cried. Jake pointed behind him. Something weird happened by the creek. Our wagon wasn't ours. Voices rose as parents and neighbors sorted through the scattered apples and the strange wagon. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward. He was a tall man with a kind face, but that kindness turned stern when he learned what happened. 6 children were supposed to return by 6, he said. And only 6 returned. The other 6, where are they? His question hung in the air. Panic erupted. Mrs. Santiago pushed through the crowd, her eyes wild. Rosa, Carlos, she shouted, seeing them. They ran into her open arms. Emma and Ethan were safe, and so was Lucy. But 2 children were missing. Tommy, Bishop, and his sister. Marisol, who had joined the others but were nowhere in sight. The sheriff ordered every able man to search the woods and orchard. Flashlights flicked across the trees. Dogs were brought out to follow scents. The remaining children huddled with their families, too frightened to speak. Night fell quickly among the trees, turning branches into dark shapes. Neighbors knocked on every door. Cars lined the dusty roads around the orchard. The sheriff organized search teams. Some would sweep the rows of trees. Others would follow the creek upstream and downstream. No one rested. Every sound a twig. Snapping, wind rustling set, hearts racing. By midnight, only a broken toy wagon wheel and muddy footprints remained to show where the missing children had been. The dogs lost the scent near the creek. The orchard, once full of laughter and sunlight, stood silent under the moon. In Cedar Grove, every window stayed lit and every ear strained for news. As dawn approached, searchers returned empty-handed. Sheriff Dalton called the families together. His voice was gentle but firm. We will not give up, he promised. We will keep looking until we find Tommy and Marisol. But in the faces of their parents, hope flickered and weakened. On that warm summer night, 6 children entered the orchard and only 4 returned. The rest of the town of Cedar Grove held its breath, unaware that this mystery would linger for decades, changing lives in ways no one could yet imagine. The days after the disappearance felt like a long, dark tunnel for Cedar Grove. Each morning the sun rose as usual, but the townspeople woke with heavy hearts. School bells rang, yet empty desks reminded teachers and students of Lucy, Jake, Rosa, Carlos, Emma, and Ethanol, smiling faces that should have been there. At home, parents tried to speak normally, but their voices cracked when they said their children's names. The sheriff's office became the center of attention. Dalton sat behind his desk, poring over notes and photographs by daylight and lamplight. He and his small team of deputies interviewed every farmhand, every fruit picker, and every traveler who had passed through the town that July afternoon. Each person told their story politely, but none could explain what really happened. Local diner booths, once filled with neighbors chatting over coffee, grew quiet. Talk turned to hushed whispers. "Did you hear about the red van?" someone asked one morning. "They say it rolled through town twice that day," answered another. Faces turned ashen. The rumor spread that a stranger in a red van had watched the children from the orchard's edge. No one knew exactly where that idea came from, but it fed the fear. On the main street, Mrs. Santiago closed her flower shop for a day, her hands trembling as she arranged bouquets. Each rose felt like a reminder that life was fragile. As weeks passed, the town held candlelight vigils at the orchard's entrance. A simple wooden cross stood where the great tree once sheltered laughter. Flowers and small toys formed a circle at its base. Families lit candles and said quiet prayers, hoping for a miracle. But each night, the candles burned down to stubs, and the vigil ended with empty arms. The sheriff would stand by the cross, promising in a low voice that he would not rest until the missing children were found. His voice was strong, but behind his eyes lay worry. The local newspaper printed every small detail: the weather that day, descriptions of the children's clothing, even a sketch of the old wooden fence. Reporters came from neighboring towns, their cameras clicking as they took pictures of the orchard. The children's faces stared out from posters hung on lampposts and store windows. Volunteers drove out to remote sections of the woods, calling the missing children's names into the quiet trees. Birds chirped overhead, and squirrels leaped from branch to branch, oblivious to the sorrow below. Inside homes, parents scrolled through late letters and phone bills. They looked for any clue, a misdialed number, a strange signature, but found nothing. They checked their own memories again and again. "Did you see anyone you didn't know near the creek, Mrs. Morgan?" asked her husband at breakfast. He shook his head slowly. "No, just the usual farmhands." She stared at her coffee cup as if it held answers. Across town, the Parkers sat at their kitchen table in silence. Emma and Ethan sat between their parents, drawing pictures of the orchard, tears smudging their crayon lines. Their mother gently wiped their faces. "We will find your friends," she whispered, though she did not know if she truly believed it. Tension grew between families. At church, once a place of comfort, whispers followed people in the pews. A few blamed each other without saying names. If only someone had watched the creek more closely, a voice muttered. What if one of the farmhands knew more than he's saying? The sheriff noticed the change, called a meeting in the town hall, and spoke firmly. "I understand your fear and anger," he said. "But we must work together, not against one another. We need cooperation, not suspicion." Some nodded, but the distrust lingered like fog over the town. Children who had played with the missing friends looked at their own games differently. Hide-and-seek felt too much like what happened that day. The teacher asked them to draw pictures of summer fun. Many produced images of apples and sunshine with a black circle around them, a silent sign of missing hearts. She gently placed their drawings on the classroom wall. Parents came and saw the small faces with big eyes, and some wept. As autumn approached, the orchard's trees lost their leaves and hung bare against gray skies. The town's fall festival went on, but laughter was forced. The apple pies tasted bitter without 6 happy voices echoing among the stalls. The sheriff's office released a statement. The case was still active, with new leads every week, but nothing had panned out. A cold case unit from the state police arrived to help. They brought equipment to comb the orchard floor for hidden clues. The townspeople watched these outsiders with a mix of hope and resentment. Hope that they might succeed. Resentment that they were reminded of their own failure. At home one evening, Jake heard his mother on the phone. "The state police will arrive tomorrow," she said. "Please pray they find something." He lay awake, thinking of his missing friends. He remembered Rose's fearless grin, Carlos's quiet jokes, Emma and Ethan's endless chatter, Lucy's boundless energy. He longed for the safe days when they all ran freely under the sun. One afternoon, Mrs. Parker found a scrap of cloth caught on a low branch in the orchard. It was tiny and faded, but it matched the dress Lucy had worn that day. She rushed to show it to Sheriff Dalton. He examined it with gloved hands and took photographs. The scrap became the town's greatest hope. Detective Ross from the state. Police joined the search. He knelt beside the branch and said softly, "This tells me someone passed through here, but not who." The scrap was carefully bagged and sent to the lab. The next week, the lab found traces of soil and pollen on the cloth that did not match Cedar Grove's orchard. The discovery stirred the town. Maybe they were taken somewhere else, someone said. Maybe someone drove them away. Search. Parties organized carpools to inspect abandoned barns, old campsites, and roadside rest areas. Each journey ended in disappointment. But for a few days, people felt they were truly chasing answers instead of waiting for them. By the winter solstice, blankets of snow covered the ground. Footprints of small animals crisscrossed the orchard, but no human tracks remained. The cold seemed to freeze hope itself. Yet every so often, a light flickered in the sheriff's window late at night. He sifted through maps and timelines, staking out possible routes. Detective Ross came and went, checking records and tapping away on a typewriter that clicked into the night. The sound was comforting to some, a sign that the hunt was not over. Letters arrived from faraway places, sometimes from a worried aunt in another state, sometimes from a kind stranger who said they prayed for Cedar Grove. Each letter reminded the town they were not alone, even if they felt forsaken. The town's pastor organized a special service for the coming spring. Families lit candles again, and children sang hymns with trembling voices. They sang of hope and faith that one day the missing friends would come home. In February, the sheriff called the families together. He spoke softly. "We have a new plan," he said, and showed them a map of highways branching out from Cedar Grove. "We will expand our search to include nearby counties, and we will work with more agencies." Some nodded, but many eyes remained weary. They had heard promises before. Still, despite their weariness, the people of Cedar Grove gathered at the orchard's edge to watch bright yellow daffodils poke through the snow. It was a sign that life would return again. They stood in silence, remembering the 6 children who had laughed among these trees. Though months of searching had yielded little, they did not give up completely. Each small bloom said that spring could bring new beginnings, and that hope, though fragile, could survive the darkest winter. The year 2024 felt different in Cedar Grove. After more than 40 years of quiet suffering, the case of the missing children came back to life. In early spring, a new notice appeared on the sheriff's office door. FBI cold case team working this file. Many townspeople paused as they walked by, reading and rereading the sign. Some felt hope. Others braced for more heartbreak. Sheriff Dalton welcomed the agents when they arrived. They wore dark suits and carried briefcases instead of flashlights. Their leader, Special Agent Carter, introduced himself in a calm voice. He had gentle eyes and spoke slowly, as though he did not want to frighten anyone. "We have new tools," he said. "We want to look again at the evidence you kept." He unzipped his briefcase and brought out a laptop computer. The townspeople whispered among themselves. Computers had changed a lot since 1982. Agent Carter sat at Sheriff Dalton's desk and opened a folder marked Project Orchard. Inside were faded photographs, torn pages of notes, and that old red cap. He clicked through each file on his screen, zooming in on grainy images with the click of a mouse. The town's old sheriff's deputies, now retired, came to share their memories. One deputy, Mr. Ellis, described how he'd photographed the orchard entrance that day. Another, Mrs. Harper, recalled sketching the area where the wheel lay. Their stories matched the files. Late one afternoon, Carter asked to see a photograph taken by Deputy Ellis. It showed a view down the row of apple trees toward the creek. The image was blurry, but it was all they had. Carter zoomed in on the middle of the frame and frowned. "Look here," he said to the sheriff. Beside the trees near the fence was a dark rectangle that no one had noticed before. It looked like part of a license plate, just a few letters partly hidden by a tree. Branch. Sheriff Dalton leaned close. "I never saw that," he admitted. Neither had the original team in 1982. The townspeople listened in the hallway, curious and anxious.
Ow.
That little shape could mean everything. Agent Carter carried the photograph back to his office, a trailer outside the sheriff's station. There he connected the image to a digital enhancer, adjusted brightness, contrast, and filters until the rectangle became clearer. Slowly, letters emerged, XPL and the number 8. Not a full plate, but more than anyone had before. Carter tapped his fingers on the desk. "This partial plate could lead us to the owner," he said quietly. "Next morning, News spread through town like wildfire. FBI found plate fragment. The local paper headline read, "Paused mid-bite." In the school, teachers broke the news gently to older students. Even the children who had grown up since the tragedy talked in hushed tones. Could this be the clue that solved the mystery? Agent Carter reached out to the state's vehicle records. He searched for any plate that contained XPL8 in the right year range. It took hours of scanning, but by late afternoon, they had a match. A commercial truck registered in a neighboring state in 1982. The owner was a long-haul driver named Frank Mason. Records showed he drove a big rig hauling produce and meats. Along Interstate 45, which passed near Cedar Grove on that fateful July day, Sheriff Dalton and Agent Carter drove the dusty roads to Mason's last known address, a weathered farmhouse on the outskirts of a small crossroads town. The house looked abandoned, broken windows, overgrown weeds, and a rusted mailbox. They knocked on the door. Silence. Then older voices called from inside. A man opened the door, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. He introduced himself as Frank's brother, Lee Mason. He admitted Frank had died 5 years earlier in an accident. He had no idea why federal agents were there now. Back in Cedar Grove, Agent Carter and the sheriff discussed their next step. They needed to search any place Frank Mason might have kept items from his journeys. Lee told them about an old tool shed behind the house. It had not been used in years. Carter requested a search warrant. Lee led them to the shed, unlocked the creaking door, and stepped back. Inside, dust lay thick on broken furniture and empty crates. But in one corner, a pile of old tarps covered something large. Carter and Dalton pulled the tarp away, and beneath it lay a faded wooden toy wagon wheel, metal spoke rim bent and paint chipped. It matched the strange wheel found by the creek in 1982. Carter knelt and traced his finger along the spokes. He felt a chill run through him. Nearby, in a cardboard box, they found small items wrapped in cloth, a red scarf with tiny sequins, 2 pairs of children's gloves, and a piece of frayed cloth that looked like it came from a dress. Carter carefully photographed each piece. Sheriff Dalton's heart pounded. He felt the weight of decades lift and crash back with every new item. They collected the items and returned to Cedar Grove. Word spread before they even left Mason's property. They found things. Families gathered outside the sheriff's station, eyes bright with emotion. The sheriff showed them the scarf and the gloves. Emma and Ethan sat on their mother's lap, trembling. They recognized the scarf as belonging to Lucy and the gloves as one of their own. Tears flowed freely. The next step was forensic testing. Agent Carter sent samples of dirt from the shed and soil scraped from the scarf to the state crime lab. He also asked for DNA testing on the cloth. While waiting for results, he interviewed Lee again. Lee said he had helped Frank unload the rig. That afternoon in 1982, Frank mentioned stopping near an orchard, but Lee thought nothing of it. He had no idea why Frank kept those items hidden for so long. Days later, the lab results came back. The soil on the scarf matched the type from Cedar Grove's orchard and creek bank. The DNA on the cloth matched Rose's family. It was proof that at least some of the missing children had been in Mason's shed. The community felt a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief to have evidence, sorrow for what it meant. Sheriff Dalton stood before the families in the old church. He held the test results in his hands. "We now know these items belong to your children," he said softly, continued. "We are closer to the truth than ever before." Mothers and fathers held each other tight. For the first time in 42 years, they felt that the mystery might end. Not with questions, but with answers. Agent Carter planned the next step, gathering witness. Testimony from people who worked with Frank. The sheriff phone-banked old employees of Mason's trucking company. Some had retired. Some had passed away. But one elderly man, Mr. Lang, remembered Frank's odd behavior after returning from a long haul. He said Frank had barked orders at him, asking him to sort through tattered cloths and shove them in boxes. Lang thought Frank was keeping souvenirs, so he let it pass. They sat down with Lang in his small apartment. He showed them an old journal Frank kept. In shaky handwriting, Frank wrote about days on the road, lonely nights, and strange encounters with hitchhikers. On July 15, 1982, Frank's entry described driving past an apple orchard, seeing children playing and hearing them laugh. He wrote that he stopped for a break and picked up something by their abandoned wagon. He noted a wheel and some cloth, but did not explain why he took them. That entry stunned Carter and Dalton. Frank had deliberately taken those items. Why? They had to know more. They secured permission to search the property of the trucking company's former Lotta concrete yard, now used as a storage area. Under a mound of gravel, they found a buried metal box with more relics, a small wooden picnic plate, a broken frisbee, even a partially melted box of chalk. Each piece a fragment of that afternoon. Back in Cedar Grove, the orchard stood under late spring sunshine. Families walked its rows, reading signs that described each item found. Their children walked beside them, curious but respectful. The town planted a new tree for each missing child. Under each tree hung a small metal tag. One more sign of remembrance and the hope that truth would heal their hearts. Inside the sheriff's Station Agent Carter prepared charges against Frank Mason's estate murder, kidnapping, and more. The court date was set for later that year. For many in Cedar Grove, justice felt closer than at any time since 1982. They still carried pain. But they also carried a renewed sense of community. The orchard, once a scene of loss, slowly changed into a place of remembrance and hope. In 2024, for the first time in 42 years, Cedar Grove believed that closure was possible. The whisper that started with a blurred photo led to a trucker's secret stash. And that secret gave families the pieces they needed. Now, they waited for the day when the court would speak, and they could finally lay their loved ones' spirits to rest. The courtroom was quiet that morning, the air heavy with years of waiting. Families of the 6 missing children, now grown, yet still children in their parents' hearts, filled the seats. Sheriff Dalton sat to one side, his uniform neat, his face calm but determined. Special Agent Carter stood at the front with the prosecutor, holding folders of evidence gathered from the old shed and Mason's journal entries. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting bright rectangles on the polished wooden floor. When the judge entered, everyone rose. After the formalities, the prosecutor began. He spoke clearly, so every word could be heard. He described how, on that hot July day in 1982, 6 children entered the apple orchard and only 4 returned. He explained how for decades the mystery stayed cold. Then he told how a blurry photograph and a partial license plate led to Frank Mason's truck, to his abandoned tool shed, and to the hidden items that proved the children had been there. Laid out each piece of evidence: the red cap, the wooden wagon wheel, the children's gloves, the journal entries. The room stayed still as he talked. Some parents held hands, others closed their eyes, as if praying. Emma and Ethan sat next to their mother, clutching each other. Rosa and Carlos, now adults, watched quietly. Lucy and Jake, too, had returned to town for the trial, their faces calm but reflective. Next, the defense attorney stood. He spoke in softer tones, admitting Mason had taken the items but questioning whether that act meant he had harmed the children. He suggested that perhaps Mason found the items by accident and kept them as mementos, with no idea of their true meaning. He pointed out that Mason's brother, Lee, claimed Frank had never shown violent behavior and had not been accused of any crime during his life. Agent Carter then took the stand. He described how he and Sheriff Dalton found the items in the shed, how the soil matched the orchard's earth, and how DNA testing linked the cloth to the missing children. He spoke honestly about following each clue, no matter how small, until it formed a clear pattern. He explained how Mason's journal entry mentioned stopping near the orchard and collecting those objects. The jury listened, eyes fixed on Carter. The defense questioned Carter gently, asking if any direct witnesses saw Mason at the orchard that day. Carter admitted no one saw him take the children, but he argued that the combination of physical evidence and written confession in the journal made a strong case. He stressed that Mason had kept those items hidden for 42 years. a fact that showed he knew they were connected to something terrible. Then Rosa was called to testify. She spoke with quiet strength, her voice steady. She described the last time she saw her brother Carlos and her friends playing. She recalled their laughter and the bright afternoon sun. Her eyes glistened as she told the court how finding her scarf and gloves in Mason's shed felt like a promise that the truth was not lost. She did not point fingers at any living person, but she made clear how it hurt to remember those moments of fear and uncertainty after her. Carlos spoke about growing up with that fear shadowing his life. He spoke of nightmares and the way he always looked over his shoulder. He thanked Agent Carter and Sheriff Dalton for not giving up. When he finished, he looked to the jury. "I don't ask for revenge," he said quietly. "I ask for justice, so no other child suffers like we did." The defense tried to show Mason's mental state was fragile, that he might have collected the items without understanding what they meant. The attorney read passages from a doctor's note about Frank Mason's mood swings and loneliness on the road. But the prosecutor countered by pointing to the clear plan in Mason's journal, how he wrote to hide the items and never tell anyone. In the afternoon, the judge allowed a forensic expert to explain how soil and pollen can be a powerful link between objects and places. The expert described how the type of pollen on the cloth could only come from trees in that specific orchard. The jury saw photos, the cellar shed, the toys, the clothes. Each image brought the story closer, as if the children had never truly left. Finally, after all witnesses spoke, the attorneys made their closing arguments. The prosecutor spoke of truth and healing, of how the families deserved to know what happened and why. He asked the jury to see the evidence clearly. Mason's journal entry, the hidden items, the matching soil and DNA, all pointing to a crime that had stayed hidden for too long. He asked for justice, not just for punishment, but for closure. The defense attorney spoke of compassion and understanding, of a man who had suffered silently and whose actions, though wrong, might not have been meant to harm. I asked the jury to consider mercy. He urged them to weigh every detail carefully without emotion. As the jury left to deliberate, the families sat together. Some held hands, others sat in silence. Sheriff Dalton stepped outside and stared at the orchard across the street. Trees were in full leaf, their apples ripening. He thought of the laughter that once rang through those branches and the fear that followed. He hoped this trial would bring healing. Hours later, the jury returned. The judge reminded them of the seriousness of their duty. The four persons stood and spoke in a strong voice. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on counts of kidnapping and manslaughter." A hush fell. Rosa exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. Carlos pressed his sister's hand. Jake and Lucy exchanged glances, relief mingled with sorrow. The judge set a sentencing hearing for the next week. In the days before sentencing, the town held a small ceremony in the orchard. Friends and family planted new trees, each with a plaque bearing a child's name. Under the shade, they shared memories of games played, songs sung, and laughter heard. They spoke of hope and how, even in darkness, the light of truth shone through. On sentencing day, the courtroom was filled again. The judge spoke of the crime's gravity and Mason's guilt, sentenced the estate to pay for a permanent memorial, and ordered the planting of a grove of apple trees to honor the 6 children. He spoke of memory and community, urging Cedar Grove to hold on to hope and care for one another. After the hearing, families gathered outside. They embraced each other, some smiling through tears. Emma and Ethan released white balloons, one for each missing friend. The balloons drifted upward into the clear sky, carrying messages of love and remembrance. The sheriff and Agent Carter watched, their hearts full. They had brought a measure of justice and peace to a town that had carried sorrow for too long. In the weeks that followed, people returned to the orchard without fear. Children ran among the trees once more, their laughter a gentle echo of the past. The new grove grew strong, and neighbors tended the young saplings together. Cedar Grove felt different now, a place where memories lived alongside healing, where truth had finally won. And though the pain of loss remained, The town found comfort in knowing the secret that had haunted them was laid to rest, and justice had brought light to the darkness. The day after the sentencing dawned cool and bright. Cedar Grove woke to birdsong and gentle sunlight spilling over the apple trees. For the first time in more than 40 years, the orchard felt peaceful instead of haunted. Families of the six, children gathered beneath the newly planted memorial grove. Each tree bore a small metal tag with a child's name: Tommy, Marisol, Lucy, Jake, Rosa, and Carlos. Parents and siblings stood side by side, their hands warm against one another. They looked at the young trees, their trunks thin but strong, and felt that new life had begun. Sheriff Dalton arrived early, wearing a plain suit instead of his uniform. He carried a small shovel, its handle worn and familiar. Agent Carter stood by his side, holding the first plaque ever placed in the grove. It read, "In memory of 6 bright young souls, may their laughter live on in every blossom." The sheriff and the agent exchanged a quiet look, shared moment of relief and respect for the journey they had traveled together. One by one, family members stepped forward to place soil around each sapling. Mrs. Morgan knelt by Tommy's tree. She scooped dirt with gentle hands and whispered her son's name. Her cheeks were wet with tears, but her lips curved into a small, grateful smile. Across the row, Mr. Santiago did the same for Marisol, carefully patting the earth. The wind rustled through the leaves, as if the orchard itself reached out in comfort. As the last handful of soil settled, the sheriff tapped his shovel against the ground. He spoke softly but clearly. "This grove stands for truth, for hope, and for healing. We plant these trees so that the names of these children will grow into something strong and lasting. May their story remind us all to look out for one another, to care, and to never give up." His words echoed among the rows of young trees, mingling with the distant hum of bees. After the planting, the families walked together down the orchard path. They passed the old wooden fence where the children once played hide-and-seek. The fence had been restored, its wires straightened, and the posts freshly painted white. Beyond it lay a small bench, carved from oak, and placed beside a weathered sign where laughter began. Emma and Ethan sat on the bench, leaning into their mother. They pointed to the sign and then to the grove. "They would have liked this," Emma said in a small voice. Her twin nodded, eyes bright. Nearby, Jake and Lucy paused at a patch of tall grass where they had found the strange cap so many years ago. Lucy knelt and gently touched the grass.
"Oh."
"This grass grew high that day," she said. "We almost missed it." Jake knelt beside her. "We did miss it," he said. "Oh, but it led us here to the truth." They sat quietly for a moment, remembering the fear of the past and the comfort of the present. As the morning moved toward noon, neighbors from Cedar Grove arrived with baskets of fresh apples and homemade pies. They set them on a long wooden table under a canopy of leaves. Plates of apple slices, jars of cider, and pastries formed a simple feast. The aroma of cinnamon and baked fruit filled the air. Children from the town ran and played along the edges of the orchard, their laughter clear and free. They chased a wayward frisbee dropped by the creek so many years ago, now replaced with a bright new one. Mrs. Parker, her face calm and gentle, offered apple slices to everyone she saw. "Every bite is for you, my dear," she said to Emma and Ethan. They smiled and ate slowly, savoring the crisp sweetness. Mr. Bishop walked through the crowd, his cane tapping on the dirt path. He stopped to greet Sheriff Dalton. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for cleaning the dust off our hearts." The sheriff nodded, his eyes misty. "We did this together," he replied, in the shade of a large oak. Agent Carter spoke with schoolteachers about turning the orchard into a living classroom. They planned lessons about nature, community, and the power of telling the truth. The teachers jotted notes as Carter described the grove's purpose. "We want students to learn that every story matters," he said. "That when someone disappears, we do not forget. We search, we listen, and we remember." The teachers nodded, enthusiastic about the project. Later, the families gathered near the old shed where the items had been found. It stood silent and empty now, its door removed, and its walls painted white. The prosecutor's office had arranged for it to become a small museum space. Inside, glass cases once held the red cap, the wooden wheel, and the pieces of cloth. Those items were housed in the town museum, and the shed remained as a quiet reminder of what had been hidden. A plaque on its front read, "Secrets buried here, truth revealed elsewhere. May we always seek the light." By afternoon, townspeople drifted back to their homes or nearby benches in the orchard. Music softly played an old song the children used to sing, "Apple blossoms in the breeze, hope grows tall like apple trees." Voices joined in for the chorus. Some sang with tears, others with smiles. The song ended, and the orchard fell into a peaceful hush, as if the trees themselves were content, as the sun began its slow descent. The sheriff and Agent Carter walked the path together. They talked quietly about the next steps: storing more of the orchard, setting up a volunteer patrol to watch over the grove, and funding scholarships in the children's names. They both knew that Cedar Grove would never be the same, but that it was stronger now. At the edge of the orchard, Rosa and Carlos found a quiet spot. They had become close again as they worked through old memories. They sat on a fallen log side by side and looked at the grove across the field. Carlos gently took his sister's hand. "I'm glad we came back," he said. Rosa nodded. "Me too. It was hard, but we needed to finish this." She squeezed his hand. "We did it together." As evening approached, lanterns were lit along the main path. A soft glow guided the way back to town. Families hugged and said their goodbyes. Children, tired from the day's excitement, climbed into cars and minivans, waving as they left. The orchard returned to quiet, but the warmth of the day lingered. That night, the sheriff sat in his living room, looking at a photo album filled with pictures from the ceremony. He saw the smiling faces, the planted trees, and the bright sky. He felt his heart ease for the first time in decades. He closed the album and whispered, "Rest now, little ones. We remember you." In the days that followed, Cedar Grove settled into a new rhythm. The orchard became a place for school trips, for family picnics, and for quiet walks. The memorial grove flourished, its leaves a bright green against the blue sky. Every spring, when the trees bloomed, the town held a day of remembrance and celebration. They told the story of the 6 children, so that every new generation would know their names and their laughter. Under the memorial grove, a small bench remained. Engraved on its back was a line from the song, "Hope grows tall like apple trees." People sat there to think, to remember loved ones, or simply to enjoy the breeze.
Ow.
On windy days, petals fell like snow, and children caught them with open hands, delighted by their soft dance. Years passed and Cedar Grove changed. New families moved in, but they learned the story from the neighbors who stayed. They cared for the trees and the shed museum. They listened when older residents spoke of that long-ago summer and how the FBI's clue in 2024 changed everything. They understood that, even in the darkest moments, truth can shine a path to healing. And so, in a quiet corner of rural America, beneath the shade of apple trees, the memory of 6 young friends lived on. Their names were spoken not in fear, but in hope. Their laughter, once lost to time, echoed again in every spring breeze. In Cedar Grove, life went on, richer and kinder for the truth that finally set them free.